There comes a moment in every relationship, a sacred pause, when you realize that the person in front of you is not just silent, they're scared. They're not pulling away because they don't feel, they're pulling away because they feel too much. Their silence isn't rejection, it's protection. The walls they built weren't designed to keep you out. They were built to keep their heart from breaking again. You see, the avoidant heart is not made of stone, it's made of glass. And every time someone walked in and made promises they didn't keep, another crack formed. Now they don't just fear love, they fear the loss of it. And the irony is, the very thing they crave the most, deep connection, is the very thing they're pushing away with all their might. So how do you reach them? How do you touch a soul that's hidden behind 10 layers of survival? You become the one thing they've never known: safety. Not the safety of silence, not the safety of walking on eggshells, but the safety of consistency, of truth, of calm energy. Your love doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stay. You don't win them over by begging for their vulnerability. You awaken it by earning it, not once, but again and again. Your energy tells a story louder than your words ever could. And when they feel that your love is not here to demand, but to understand, something begins to shift. The armor loosens. The eyes soften, the soul peeks out and says, maybe this time is different. But don't confuse patience with passivity. You must never abandon yourself in the name of saving someone else. You are not their rescuer. You are their reminder that love can be safe and freedom doesn't always mean leaving. This is not about fixing an avoidant. It's about becoming so anchored in your truth, so grounded in your presence, that you become the one person who doesn't flinch when they flinch, who doesn't walk away when they shut down, who stays not because you're desperate, but because you're devoted to showing what real love looks like. And maybe, just maybe, your courage to see beyond their patterns becomes the very thing that invites them out of their pain. Maybe your light doesn't force them to open. It gives them permission to. And in that sacred space, where fear once ruled, love gets to enter. That's how you disarm the avoidant. Not with force, not with fear, but with a fierce kind of softness. A love that doesn't chase. It waits with strength. A presence that says, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be real. Because when someone finally feels seen without being shamed, when they are loved without being cornered, they begin to come home to themselves. And you become the lighthouse they never saw coming. Avoidants often wear a mask of indifference, but underneath that mask is a wounded heart that has learned, often through experience, that vulnerability equals danger. When you approach someone with an avoidant attachment style, what you're really approaching is a nervous system that's been trained to associate closeness with risk. So the first step is not to analyze their behavior or take it personally when they pull away. It's to understand their wounds before you ever demand their words. They didn't become avoidant overnight. Somewhere along the way, whether through childhood neglect, emotional inconsistency, betrayal, or loss, they formed a belief that it's safer to depend on themselves than to risk the heartbreak of needing others. And that belief became a blueprint, one they live by every day, even if it sabotages the connection they crave. When someone you care about withdraws, goes quiet, or seems distant, your instinct may be to chase, to fix, or to pull them closer with intensity. But here's the truth. That only reinforces their fear. They read that as pressure, and pressure equals threat. So they shut down even more. That's why it's critical to move beyond the surface and truly see what's underneath their avoidance. You're not dealing with a lack of emotion, you're dealing with a flood of unspoken emotion that they've never had the tools or safety to process. They may seem calm on the outside, but inside their nervous system is on high alert, scanning for signs that the connection might become unsafe or overwhelming. This is where your role becomes spiritual. This is where you have to step into your highest self, not to fix them, but to offer presence over pressure and curiosity over control. Imagine what it would feel like to go through your whole life believing that if someone saw the real you, they'd leave. Now imagine someone shows up and doesn't ask you to open up right away, but simply makes it safe for you not to. That's what understanding their wounds does. It removes the demand and replaces it with invitation. It tells their nervous system, you're not in danger here. And the more consistently you embody that message through your tone, your patience, your non-reactivity, the more their defenses begin to soften. Because underneath every avoidant is a deeply sensitive person who's been abandoned emotionally one too many times. When you get that, when you really get it, you stop needing their words to validate your worth, and you start showing up in a way that allows them to feel worthy, even in silence. You're not excusing their distance, you're understanding its origin. And from that place of understanding, transformation becomes possible. You become a mirror that reflects back safety, not judgment. A quiet force that says, I see the pain beneath the pattern. And I'm not here to fix it, I'm here to honor it. Avoidants don't respond to emotional intensity the way others might. In fact, the more emotionally intense the situation becomes, the more likely they are to shut down or withdraw. This isn't because they lack depth or empathy, quite the opposite. Their nervous systems are wired to become overwhelmed in the face of heightened emotion, especially when it involves conflict, expectation, or perceived criticism. Emotional safety, not intensity, is what opens the door to real connection with them. They've likely experienced moments in life where emotion came with chaos, where vulnerability led to rejection or shame. So now when they sense strong emotional waves, their inner system sounds an alarm, and their instinct is to retreat to what feels safe, distance. To reach someone with an avoidant attachment style, you must become an energy of calm presence, not emotional volatility. That doesn't mean you suppress your own feelings. It means you communicate them with grounded clarity and emotional regulation. Avoidants need to feel like they're not going to be engulfed by your needs, your pain, or your expression. When your presence feels peaceful, they start to trust that being close to you doesn't mean losing themselves or being blamed. Emotional safety isn't just about avoiding conflict. It's about how you handle it. It's about the space you create when things get tough. Do you explode and demand answers, or do you create a space where they feel they can step forward without being punished? This doesn't mean you walk on eggshells. It means you become a steady light, someone who doesn't chase, but also doesn't withdraw. Someone who says, through action, you're safe here. I'm not going to shame you for needing space, and I'm not going to disappear because you're not opening up fast enough. And that kind of presence disarms the subconscious alarm bells that avoidants have been living with for years. Because emotional safety is about more than just being kind. It's about being consistent, being reliable, being able to hold space for their silence without trying to fill it out of your own discomfort. What often surprises people is that once avoidants feel safe, they can actually open up in beautiful, authentic ways. But they do so slowly. They test the waters. They need to feel that when they reveal a small part of themselves, it will be met with acceptance, not pressure for more. So your role isn't to push them to be more vulnerable. It's to be someone they can be vulnerable around. That's a huge difference. Because when you lead with emotional safety, you're showing them something they may have never experienced. A relationship that doesn't use emotion as a weapon, but as a bridge. And in time, that bridge becomes a path back to themselves, and maybe even to you. Consistency is the language an avoidant understands, even if they pretend they don't care. Grand gestures may feel powerful in the moment, but for someone who has spent their life bracing for abandonment, they don't mean much without proof over time. What truly disarms their defenses is not how loudly you declare your love, but how quietly you show up. Not once, not when it's convenient, but consistently, in both calm and chaos. Because avoidants have learned that people leave, not in the beginning, but eventually. So they don't trust words, they trust patterns. And the only way to shift their internal belief that closeness leads to pain is to create a new pattern they haven't experienced before. An avoidant might test you without realizing it. That avoidant might test you without realizing it. They might withdraw emotionally or physically, become cold, distant, or even sarcastic. This isn't about punishing you. It's about protecting themselves. They're watching to see if your connection is conditional. Will you still care when they're not performing connection the way you want? Will you stick around when they're not immediately giving you what you need? They need to know if your love is stable or if it depends on their emotional availability. And every time you meet their distance with steady presence, not codependence, not chasing, but authentic steadiness, you send a signal to their subconscious that perhaps this relationship isn't like the rest. Are you able to stay emotionally grounded, even when they create distance? These small, subtle signals are what help their nervous system relax. It teaches them over time that connection doesn't always lead to disappointment, that someone can stay even when they're hard to reach. that love doesn't have to mean performance or pressure. This is not about tolerating mistreatment. It's about recognizing that real transformation happens through repetition, not intensity. You don't need to prove your love with fireworks. You need to prove it with the way you consistently return to the relationship with integrity, with the way you remain available without forcing closeness, with the way you respond with calm instead of reactivity. And avoidance defenses are not dismantled in a single breakthrough moment. They're dismantled gradually through thousands of tiny moments where they expected abandonment and received presence instead, where they expected judgment and received grace, where they prepared to be pushed away for pulling back, and instead were met with someone who didn't flinch. That kind of consistency builds a foundation where trust can finally begin to take root. And once that trust begins to grow, the avoidant no longer has to protect themselves with distance, because now they've experienced a kind of love that doesn't vanish when things get real. When dealing with an avoidance, the need to perform can become a trap. You start thinking that if you just say the right words, make the right moves, or act in the perfect way, you'll get them to open up. But that very energy of trying to perform love creates pressure, and pressure is the last thing an avoidant nervous system can tolerate. They read your efforts not as care, but as control, not as intimacy, but as an expectation. And the more you chase their openness, the more they feel the need to protect it. That's why mastering patience is more powerful than any performance. Patience sends the message, you don't have to hurry. I'm not here to make you do anything. I'm here because I care. Even when you're not performing love the way I want. The temptation to fix the dynamic will be strong, especially when you're giving your best and it seems like they're giving you nothing back. Love is not a transaction, especially not with someone who has spent a lifetime keeping score in order to survive. If you enter the relationship needing results, you'll burn out. You'll keep watching their every move, looking for signs that your actions are working, and when they don't respond the way you hope, you'll feel rejected. But they're not rejecting you. They're responding to the energy of performance they can feel when they're being maneuvered emotionally, even subtly, and it only deepens their desire to escape. That's why true progress happens not when you try harder to make them respond, but when you stop needing a response in the first place. Patience is not passive. It's an active decision to show up without forcing change. It's choosing to hold a space of calm and clarity even when the other person is stuck in fear. And that kind of patience isn't born from desperation, it's born from alignment. It comes from being so centered in your own emotional truth that you don't need someone else's behavior to validate your worth. You're not proving anything, you're offering presence. And over time, that presence becomes healing. Not because it pushes them to open up, but because it shows them a new possibility. That connection can exist without pressure. It's also about playing the long game. Avoidants often move at a different pace, and it's easy to confuse their silence with indifference. But if you're patient, you may begin to see subtle shifts. Not loud declarations, but small signs of trust. Maybe it's a deeper eye contact, a spontaneous text, a willingness to sit closer. These moments are sacred. They're the slow unfurling of a heart that's learning, possibly for the first time, that love doesn't demand performance, it honors presence. And when they feel that your love isn't trying to force a timeline, but is simply committed to walking beside them, they begin to show up not out of fear or guilt, but from a place of choice. And that choice is what real love is built on. When you try to reach an avoidant person by confronting their behavior directly, you're often met with defensiveness, withdrawal, or emotional shutdown. That's because avoidants have developed internal strategies to survive emotional overwhelm, not to hurt you, but to protect themselves. These strategies include distancing, minimizing their needs, rationalizing emotions, or pretending not to care. If you try to argue with their logic or force them to express feelings they've buried, you're not reaching their soul. You're just activating their defense system. And that's where most people go wrong. They try to fix the avoidant from the outside in, when what's really needed is to connect from the inside out. To speak to an avoidant's soul, you have to go deeper than their surface behavior. You have to become aware of the unspoken question beneath their silence. Will you still be here when I show you who I really am? Because what they hide isn't apathy, it's vulnerability. It's the fear that their emotional world is too much, or not enough, or somehow broken. So when you engage with them only on the level of their reactions, you're missing the deeper part of them that longs to be seen without being cornered. The soul doesn't open to pressure, it opens to presence. That means shifting your energy from trying to get a reaction to simply offering understanding. It's in the way you listen without interrupting, in the way you stay when they need space without guilt-tripping them, in the way you gently reflect what you sense without labeling them or analyzing them. For example, instead of saying, "You always pull away," you might say, "I get the sense that sometimes it feels safer for you to take a step back. And that's okay. I'm not here to change that, just to understand it." That kind of language reaches past their strategies and speaks to the part of them that longs for connection but is terrified to trust it. You also have to become the kind of person who doesn't need to win, who doesn't need to be right. Because when you stop trying to crack their shell and instead start becoming the soft place for them to land, the dynamic shifts. You're not chasing them into vulnerability. You're holding a space where they can enter it on their own terms. And sometimes that means saying less, doing less, and just being more fully present. Your energy becomes an invitation, not an interrogation. This is where emotional maturity becomes your superpower, because when you speak from your grounded truth, without blame or desperation, they feel it, even if they can't respond right away. Your steadiness becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, they begin to see themselves differently, not as someone who always has to hide, but as someone who might actually be safe to be seen. You can't force that shift, but you can inspire it. And when you do, you're not just speaking to their defenses, you're speaking directly to their soul. Loving someone with an avoidant attachment style requires an unusual strength, the ability to hold space for their boundaries without abandoning your own. It's easy to get lost in trying to understand them, to be patient with their silence, to empathize with their fear of closeness. But if you're not rooted in your own emotional truth, you may start making subtle sacrifices that eventually cost you your self-worth. The line between support and self-betrayal is thin, and when you cross it repeatedly in the name of love, resentment builds. Quietly at first, but powerfully over time. You start suppressing your needs to avoid conflict. You silence your voice because you don't want to push them further away. You tell yourself that love means waiting, but the waiting starts to feel like disappearing. True connection doesn't ask you to shrink. It asks you to stand tall, even while honoring someone else's rhythm. That's the paradox of healing relationships. They require you to stretch in compassion without bending so far that you break. When you honor your own boundaries, you send a signal to the avoidant that love doesn't mean losing control, that closeness doesn't mean enmeshment. You model what healthy space looks like, space that isn't abandonment but respect. This is vital because avoidants often expect one of two extremes. Either someone invades them emotionally or someone vanishes. Your ability to hold your own center gives them a third experience, one where intimacy and individuality coexist. There will be moments when they withdraw, and your instinct may be to close the gap, to chase, to prove that you're safe. But every time you chase, you step out of alignment with yourself. You start reacting to their fear instead of responding from your truth. And in that space, you become less grounded, more anxious, more performative. This only reinforces their belief that relationships are overwhelming. Instead, when you hold your boundary, not from anger, but from calm certainty, you demonstrate a kind of emotional leadership that invites, rather than demands, connection. This means saying things like, "I respect your need for space, and I'm here, but I also need openness and communication to feel safe too." That's not an ultimatum, it's a truth. And when you speak your truth with grace, not guilt, you become a mirror for them. You show them that it's possible to stay without losing yourself. You teach by embodying, not by explaining. And in that embodiment, you give them something rare. A partner who is both emotionally available and emotionally sovereign. Avoidants don't open up to people who chase them. They open up to people who don't need to be chosen to feel whole. Your strength in holding space for them while remaining loyal to your own emotional needs is what creates a dynamic where real connection can grow. Because when both people are allowed to be fully themselves, protected, seen, and respected, love stops being a battlefield and starts becoming a sanctuary. In the end, reaching the heart of an avoidant isn't about strategy or sacrifice. It's about becoming a space of safety, truth, and unwavering presence. When you lead with understanding instead of urgency, consistency instead of control, and love without self-abandonment, you offer them something they've rarely known: connection without pressure and closeness without fear. Thank you for taking the time to listen, to grow, and to be the kind of love that heals instead of demands. Keep showing up with heart, with strength, and with soul, because that's the kind of presence that transforms lives.